I just was always a wild, loose kid in my neighborhood. I just always went for mine. I maintained myself. I knew how to hustle, and I definitely wasn't no punk.
These little running around like I wasn't brought up. I brought up toting slammers. Like, so my belt had to be extra tight. You feel me? Like
the first game, my nigga Punch Jim was popping, homie. Cat boy, I still fuck with you already know. I shout out to Melly and everybody. I still fuck with my in Harlem. It's all good.
The border between street respect and hip-hop fame has always been quite thin. And Rod Diggs spent a night in New York. Rod Diggs ensured that Jim Jones experienced this lesson directly. There was no internet rumor or report about this. The event was one of those occasions when conversations about the true identities of people in the city spilled to every block. Barbershop and corner. Jim Jones was soaring. Dipset was attractive. Ballin was all over the place. He was also moving like a member of the Harlem nobility. However, they didn't submit to anyone on the streets of Brooklyn. Rod Diggs was able to help with it. Before he even spoke a word, there was already fear associated with his name. Rod Diggs was more than simply a rapper back then. He was a street general with certification. He had a heavy legend. The industry respected the ex-con and the projects long before it recognized his name. And he had a reputation for acting like a boss. People were quiet when you brought up Rod Diggs. He had Warriors connections and a code he truly adhered to. People, especially Raw, took notice when Jim Jones began to go through Brooklyn, talking slickly and exuding that Harlem vibe.
I'm from the era where we sold the drugs, we didn't use them per se. That was the quote-unquote.
It all started at a club event in Brooklyn.
It all began at a Brooklyn club function. A certain kind of industry gathering night on the street. Jim Jones pulled up deep, revealing Dipset's presence in the building while flashing jewels and popping bottles. He exuded a rock star aura, complete with swagger, shades, and a Harlem attitude. Yet something about that evening felt off. People claimed that Jim's team got into a fight with some local guys about bottles or sitting. And those people just so happened to have ties to Raw Diggs. Raw was informed within minutes, and the atmosphere in the room changed when he got there. According to witnesses, you could sense it. The music became more subdued. People began to move aside. Rod Diggs appeared to be someone who didn't need to prove anything as he strolled in a composed yet hefty manner. "You good, homie?" he asked Jim Jones directly after glancing at him. "Do you know where you are?" At that point, the tone shifted. Raw wasn't there for a Hollywood act, despite Jim's best efforts to remain composed. "There are no cameras out here," he informed him. "Respect is reciprocated." Everyone in attendance was aware that this was not a debate. One man was examining another in this instance. Jim didn't protest, which is the crazy thing. He refrained from swinging. He refrained from barking. He merely gave a nod. Rod Diggs turned and left as if nothing had happened when they attempted to defuse it. However, there was a loud quiet that followed. People compared it to witnessing a celebrity acknowledge that he is still just a guy in the city of another man.
You blood from this day on, when you see us throw it up, you be putting way more work in than half these bloods that be out here and things like that. So you the homie now. When you see us throw it up, that's just...
You had to know Rod Diggs in order to truly get why that moment struck so deeply. Truly was. He wasn't a rapper pretending to be rough. He was born Ronald Herron. He was from Brooklyn's Gowanus houses, which are one of those places where you may either make money or get sucked in. Long before his music was popular, Raw was well known on the streets. He had already established a reputation that was both respected and intimidating by the time he began rapping. People paid attention to him when he spoke, and not simply because of the lyrics. He stood for the traditional street structure that New York had begun to lose as celebrity took control. Therefore, it wasn't only a personal matter when Rod Diggs and Jim Jones met. It was a clash of cultures. You had Brooklyn discipline versus Harlem flash. Jim was gregarious, colorful, self-assured, and talkative. Brooklyn was Raw Diggs, unvarnished, aggressive, and without a smile. And that Harlem swagger was meaningless that night. According to legend, Raw wasn't attempting to start a feud. He was establishing a limit. Rumor had it that Jim's group treated the locals disrespectfully by tossing money and acting as though they owned the area. When Rob arrived, he reminded him, "This isn't your block. This is mine."
They allege that Heron is guilty of racketeering charges for running a drug-dealing operation in the Gowanus housing development where he grew up. They also claim he was involved in 3 murders and 3 attempted murders.
Because everyone who witnessed the meeting described it in the same way. Word of it quickly spread. Raw didn't scream or make threats, simply calmly examined him in front of everyone. And it became legendary because of that serenity. He could get attention without making any noise. Jim's tone reportedly shifted after that. No more boasting or Harlem gossip. He was aware of the time. Despite the fact that no punches were exchanged, the entire incident became urban legend. That was the night Brooklyn temporarily humbled Harlem. Whispers began to circulate after that. Raw Diggs put pressure on Jim. In Brooklyn, he gave in. He learned to respect the ground from Rod Diggs. The narrative stayed, whether or not it was overblown. And once a tale like that is associated with you in New York, it endures forever. When Rod Diggs became embroiled in his federal case and was sentenced to life in prison a few years later, people continued to cite that incident as evidence of his authenticity. They would think he was crazy, but he maintained his composure in the face of celebrities. The encounter was incorporated into the story of Raw. On that day, he reminded the industry that some stardom simply doesn't transcend certain boundaries.
3 life sentences. You heard about this?
I actually seen it on, I think it was on your website yesterday, and I was like, and I feel.
For Jim Jones, that evening served as a wake-up call. Jim has always been self-assured and a hustler. Yet even he was unable to dispute the damage that incident caused to his reputation on the streets. Outside of his zone, people began talking, but Harlem continued to rock with him heavy. Fans would reply, "But what about Rod Diggs?" Whenever he spoke harshly in interviews or sang about being outside, it turned into the one tale that people couldn't stop talking about. The crazy thing is that Jim never once addressed it directly. He never disputed it or confirmed it, and his quiet said it all. Because you would expect a man like Jim to correct the record if it wasn't true. Instead, perhaps realizing that certain stories are better left untold, he remained silent. However, others who know Jim claim that moment altered his behavior behind the scenes. He began bringing fewer people to Brooklyn events after that evening. He put less emphasis on the street entertainment and more on business. Raw's check almost served as a wake-up call, telling him that celebrity doesn't make things go away. In the meantime, Raw Diggs came to represent the true spirit of New York. He stood for the streets that never sought influence. People continued to use his name even after he was found guilty. Rappers made references to him in their songs. Street guys told tales of how courteous he was when you were right, and how lethal he could get when you weren't. What set him apart was his ability to strike a balance between respect and fear. This narrative kept coming up when interviews and documentaries about old New York began to appear. Jim Jones was humbled by Rod Diggs that evening. It demonstrated something genuine, not because it was neat. When the ego leaves this neighborhood, how can it be checked? For admirers, it went beyond rumors. It served as a reminder that you are a part of the streets, not something you rent. Years later, every time Jim's name is brought up in a discussion about street credibility, that one anecdote still comes up. It's exaggerated according to some. Others claim to have personally witnessed it. However, the message is always the same. No matter how well known you become, there will always be someone quieter, more genuine, and prepared to put you to the test if you lose your spot. Ultimately, that evening became a part of the legend of New York hip-hop. Rod Diggs served as a reminder to everyone that fame does not make the streets bend. It has nothing to do with violence. It has nothing to do with ego. It had to do with principle. Jim Jones was not made to feel uncomfortable by Rod Diggs. He took this action to preserve the code. Respect always takes precedence over reputation. And the younger generation needs to witness that. It wasn't a complete loss for Jim. It served as a lesson. He has since developed into a family man, a businessman, and even a motivator. The old Jim that thrived on conflict began to give way to the version we see today, which may have accelerated his maturation. Older is wiser. However, neither the supporters nor the streets ever forget. This kind of story exists in every community. But it just so happened to involve two names that are significant enough to reverberate across many years. Rod Diggs' legacy became difficult. Some people associate him with the music that never really took off. He is remembered by some as the final member of a disappearing breed, someone who moved with a code, loyalty, and courage. His name is still respectfully mentioned, even if he is incarcerated, because you knew he stood for something genuine, regardless of whether you feared or loved him. The story's lesson is that while you may purchase automobiles, diamonds, celebrities, and fans, you cannot purchase respect. That's earned in settings where no one is filming when power and pride collide. And Rod Diggs demonstrated what that meant that evening in Brooklyn. That being said, there was more to the day Rod Diggs humbled Jim Jones than meets the eye. It was a pivotal moment that demonstrated the distinction between foundation and fame. Brooklyn had the code, even though Harlem had the lights. The streets recalled who left with their respects intact after those two collided. Because the rules in this game are the same whether you're a boss, a fighter, or a rapper. Real cannot be faked. Rod Diggs didn't need to say much to prove it that evening. And that night in Brooklyn, right there, turned into one of those tales that people on the streets couldn't stop discussing. Because Rod Diggs and Jim Jones weren't the only topics. It focused on what transpires when perception and reality collide. You see, a man can lose sight of his position due to celebrity. However, the streets will never stop reminding you. A camera, a chain, or a viral event was not necessary for Rod Diggs. His very presence was more powerful than any successful album. He didn't need to make any threats, didn't need to create a commotion. He just reminded the individual that respect is more important than fame by looking him in the eyes. The younger generation doesn't understand that. It doesn't matter who is the loudest on the internet. When the lights go out, it's about who can remain upright. Jim Jones felt humbled that evening. You might be wealthy, well-known, or even legendary in your field. However, respect is the only coin that counts when you enter another man's world. He had to learn that the hard way. And that moment became part of his story, whether or not he ever talks about it. Sometimes the only way to accept the truth without acknowledging it is to remain silent. Although Rod Diggs is currently incarcerated, his legacy endures. People still discuss his demeanor, the fact that he never bowed to anyone, and the fact that his name still reverberates across borough lines. He embodied the vintage New York vibe that is now uncommon, where reputation derived from actual deeds rather than following in words had meaning. One thing is certain, even if you disagree with everything he did, he maintained his composure. The streets are not being exalted in this tale. It's about keeping in mind the foundation of the game. Discipline, loyalty, and integrity are the kinds of values that distinguish the real from the phony. Like Rod Diggs, every rapper aspires to be regarded, but few are willing to pay the price. And for that reason, this tale is eternal. It's not just a headline, it's a warning story.